I want you to try a little thought experiment with me to kick things off today.
Oh, I love these.
Right. So just imagine for a moment that you have achieved, like, ultimate, unquestioned power.
Okay, setting the bar high.
Yeah. I mean, you've climbed to the very top of the mountain, you command armies, you shape the laws of the land, your face is literally minted on the coins in people's pockets.
So it's pretty good so far.
And millions are just hanging on your every word. It sounds like the absolute pinnacle of human security, right? Like, you are completely untouchable.
But you're really not.
Exactly. Because then the reality of that position sets in. You realize that the very visibility giving you this immense power has also painted a massive glowing target right on your back.
It is, hands down, the ultimate paradox of leadership. The moment you step into the light to lead, you basically forfeit the safety of the shadows.
And that tension, between holding power and actually physically surviving it is exactly what we are unpacking today.
It's such a massive topic.
It really is. We're pulling from a truly fascinating source for this deep dive. It's excerpts from Louis Benaldi's comprehensive book, Power, Risk, and Survival, a chronological study of global leaders and political violence, 30 CE to 2025.
A really incredible compilation of data in that one.
Oh, absolutely. And the mission of this deep dive is to trace the 2 millennia evolution of political violence. We are going to track the weapons and the vulnerabilities from hidden Roman daggers all the way up to modern nerve agents.
Yeah, quite a leap in technology.
Right. And we're doing this to uncover the hidden patterns of exactly why leaders either survive or, well, why they fall.
Which is super relevant today.
It is. But before we go any further, I do need to do a quick bit of housekeeping. Because our source material analyzes recent events involving politically charged figures across the spectrum, including Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk, and Alexei Navalny, we want to make it crystal clear to you. We are not taking any political sides today.
Absolutely not.
We aren't endorsing any viewpoints or ideologies. We are strictly and impartially reporting on the historical and sociological analysis contained in the author's text. We're looking at the year 2025 with the exact same cold, impartial magnifying glass that we use on the year 41 CE.
Which, honestly, is the only way to genuinely understand the data here. I mean,
Yeah.
Before we look at specific events, we really have to establish the core thesis Benaldi presents.
Right, which is
That leadership has always been fundamentally inseparable from vulnerability. That is the one constant across 2,000 years. But the fascinating part, and what we'll see today, is watching how the methods of violence and the motives behind those threats drastically evolve right alongside, human technology, architecture, and societal structure.
okay, let's unpack this. Because
Yeah.
I want to start the dawn of centralized power.
The ancient and medieval eras.
Yeah. So picture the Roman emperors. They command these vast, terrifying militaries, right?
The best in the world at the time.
Exactly. They build these massive stone fortresses with walls 30 feet thick, and yet, historically speaking, they are almost never killed by a foreign army storming the gates with siege engines.
No.
They were overwhelmingly killed by the people sleeping in the very next room.
The inner circle.
Right. Think of ancient security like a modern corporate hierarchy, or maybe even better, a submarine.
Oh, I like the submarine analogy.
Right. Like the thick steel hull can withstand the crushing pressure of an entire ocean, which in this case is your invading army.
Yeah.
But if one single valve inside the control room breaks, the whole crew drowns. The threat wasn't the ocean, it was the plumbing. It's the ultimate, the call is coming from inside the house scenario. Physical walls mean absolutely nothing if your inner circle is compromised.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. Because when you look at the ancient data from Benaldi, the threats were overwhelmingly private. They were intimate and internal.
Give us an example.
We'll take Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. Right. He had elite personal guards, he had ultimate legal authority, but he was stabbed to death by the senators.
Literally his peers.
Exactly. These were the people he invited into his proximity. Or look at Caligula in 41 CE. He was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard.
Wait, wasn't that the specific military unit whose only job was to keep him alive?
Literally their only job.
Yeah.
Yes. And Commodus in 192 CE strangled in his bath following a conspiracy by his personal aides.
Wow. Which implies that the open attacks, the things you build walls to keep out, were essentially irrelevant.
Pretty much.
The closer you allowed someone to get to you physically, the higher your risk. But why? Why was insider betrayal the dominant lethality factor?
Well, it's because in those autocratic, court-centered societies, power is highly concentrated, but it lacks an institutional framework.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, there were no formal independent security agencies like we have today. Guards weren't loyal to the office or constitution. Ancient rulers relied purely on personal loyalty.
Or financial patronage, right? Paying
Right.
them off.
Exactly. So the mechanism of surviving meant you had to keep your inner circle constantly satisfied, terrified, or deeply vetted.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. And once that internal loyalty fractured, usually over money or perceived slight lethality, was almost guaranteed.
Because they already had access.
Right. The attackers already possessed the one thing an assassin needs most: physical proximity. They were already inside the submarine.
Okay, so if ancient leaders died in their bedrooms, I'm trying to figure out why the medieval era shifts the landscape. Benaldi introduces this really interesting concept of a captivity multiplier.
Yes, this is a crucial shift.
So we start seeing leaders like King Edward II in 1327 or Richard II in 1399 who aren't just suddenly stabbed in the bathhouse.
Right.
They're deposed, locked in their own castles, and then they die. Why the delay? Like, if you've overthrown the king, why not just kill him on the spot?
It comes down to the decentralization of medieval power. See, a Roman emperor held absolute singular authority. But a medieval king relied on this really fragile web of feudal lords, vassals, and heavy influence from the church.
Oh, so it's a PR problem.
Exactly. If a rival faction simply murdered the king in his sleep, they risked alienating all the other lords and starting a massive civil war. So instead, when a ruler was deposed, they were imprisoned. The rival faction would claim they were holding the king for his own protection or awaiting a formal trial.
Ah, I see. But the book points out that in the medieval era, captivity without autonomy was essentially a delayed death sentence.
Oh, the survival rate drops to absolute zero.
It's zero.
Zero. Richard II was confined in Pontefract Castle and likely starved to death. Edward II was imprisoned and murdered covertly. Benaldi's point is that the moment a leader cedes control of their physical environment to political enemies, their massive stone fortresses literally become their tombs.
That is dark.
It is, because you no longer control your food supply, your access to sunlight, or the guards at your door. The environment itself becomes the weapon used against you.
Okay, hold on. I'm struggling with the distinction here as we move into the early modern era, so like the 16th to 18th centuries. The text says political violence suddenly becomes a public spectacle.
Right. The move to the public square.
Yeah. We're talking about the state-sanctioned beheadings of Mary, Queen of Scots in 1587 and Louis VI in 1793. But let me push back on this for a second.
For it.
Weren't these public executions just a different flavor of insider betrayal? Or did the rules of the game fundamentally change? Because to me, they were still locked up by their rivals and killed.
What's fascinating here is that the rules absolutely did change.
Really?
Because
Yeah.
the audience changed and the concept of legitimacy evolved. You're right that they were captives, but the mechanism of termination moved from a quiet poisoning in a dark dungeon to a highly visible ceremonial execution in a public square.
Oh, because of the printing press.
Yes, the
Yeah.
printing press was a game changer. Plus, formal legal courts and revolutionary tribunals were taking shape. State-sanctioned methods were meant to ensure legal justification.
You couldn't just quietly starve a monarch and tell the public they caught a fever anymore.
Right. The public wouldn't buy it. To legitimize the transfer of power, the new regime had to formally, legally, and publicly dismantle the old one. They were killing the symbol just as much as the person.
Okay, so visibility was required for political turnover by the state. But as we push into the 19th century, visibility stops being a tool of the state and suddenly becomes a massive liability for the leaders themselves.
Yes.
Benaldi uses this phrase, the democratization of violence.
That's a great term. Up until the 19th century, to kill a leader, you had to either be in their trusted inner circle or you had to command a massive army. You needed physical proximity, literally the length of a dagger.
Right.
But the 19th century introduces reliable, mass-produced firearms and chemical explosives. Suddenly, you don't need an invitation to the palace court. You just need a line of sight.
Wait, so the geometry of security inverted. You used to build a wall to keep the threat out, but with firearms, the threat is the empty space itself.
That is exactly the shift. Attackers could now strike from a distance, just exploiting that open space.
Like Abraham Lincoln.
Exactly. Look at Lincoln in 1865. The architectural layout of Ford's Theater was a nightmare.
It was totally open.
Open venue. The president's box was accessible from a public hallway, and a disgruntled actor with a pistol altered the course of a nation. Or look at Tsar Alexander II in Russia in 1881.
Oh, that's the carriage attack, right?
Yes. He had survived multiple palace intrigues, the old style of threat, But he was killed by revolutionaries who threw a bomb at his carriage.
And the mechanism of that carriage attack is wild to read about. It wasn't just a random throw. The attackers studied the urban layout of St. Petersburg. They knew the exact cobblestone route his carriage took.
They planned it meticulously.
Yeah, they knew exactly where it had to slow down to turn a corner, and they used multiple bombers.
It was a coordinated spatial attack. The first bomb stopped the carriage, but then the Tsar made a fatal mistake. He stepped out of the armored cabin into the open street to check on his wounded guards.
Which exposed him.
Right. It exposed him to the second member, who just dropped the lethal explosive right at his feet. The street itself became the kill zone.
Because leaders in the 19th century were trying to build public participation in politics, right? Doing open-air rallies, urban parades, riding in open carriages.
Yes, trying to be seen.
And by doing that, they were inadvertently creating their own worst vulnerabilities. But this era also introduces what might be the most crucial new variable into the survival equation, the medical response.
Yes, this is huge. We see this clearly with President James A. Garfield in 1881. He was shot in a public train station in Washington, D.C.
But the gunshot wasn't actually what killed him, right?
No, it wasn't. He survived the initial ballistic trauma. He actually died weeks later from massive infection.
The doctors.
Right. His doctors, operating before the widespread acceptance of germ theory, were literally probing the bullet wound with unwashed fingers and unsterilized instruments.
It's just a brutal irony. But it highlights something massive. As weapons became ranged and public attacks increased, immediate trauma care became the deciding factor in whether a leader lived or died.
The weapon had completely outpaced the armor.
So survival was no longer just about preventing the attacker from pulling the trigger. It was about managing the catastrophic damage afterward.
Which brings us perfectly into the 20th and 21st centuries, the age of the symbolic target.
Let's get into it.
So we established that firearms created the line-of-sight vulnerability.
Right.
But the combination of mass media, global communication, and eventually the internet created a totally new type of victim.
Because you no longer need to wear a crown or sit in the Oval Office to be a target. You just need a microphone.
Exactly.
And just a quick reminder to you listening, honoring our rule of strict neutrality here, we are looking objectively at the modern case studies Benaldi presents. But the source points out that the risk profile of traditional heads of state is now practically identical to public activists. The book specifically cites the 2025 assassination of the activist Charlie Kirk. He didn't hold a state office, he didn't command an army, but he was killed at a university event simply due to his massive symbolic influence and the open venue access.
That is the modern threat matrix, in a nutshell. It is heavily, heavily driven by ideology and public exposure. If you hold symbolic authority, if you represent a massive movement, a controversial idea, or fierce opposition, you naturally attract violent attention.
Right.
And the environment you choose to operate in completely dictates your vulnerability.
Well, let's break down that environment because the text contrasts two very different types of modern attacks to show just how complex the threat has become. You have the 2022 assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and then the targeting of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
Two vastly different methodologies. Shinzo Abe is a tragic, almost textbook example of the 19th century line-of-sight vulnerability colliding with the 21st century.
Because of where he was standing.
Right. He was speaking at a public campaign event on a street island. The perimeter lacked anti-sniper protocols, and he had total 360-degree exposure. The crowd noise provided acoustic cover.
Yeah.
So an attacker with a crude homemade firearm was able to just walk up behind him and exploit that open space.
But Navalny's case operates on a totally different level. It's almost a throwback to the ancient covert methods we talked about earlier, but modernized with terrifying science.
Absolutely. Navalny was targeted with a complex covert poisoning using a Novichok nerve agent. And from a sociological standpoint, you have to ask, why use a nerve agent instead of a bullet?
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. A bullet creates a crime scene and an immediate martyr. A nerve agent induces a systemic physiological failure that, in the chaotic first hours, mimics a severe natural medical event.
It's designed to blur the line between assassination and a health crisis. Navalny survived the initial poisoning thanks to swift international medical evacuation, which, again, points to that medical variable acting as the new armor.
Yes.
But he ultimately died in an Arctic penal colony in 2024.
Which proves that the medieval captivity multiplier never went away. Being in state custody without autonomy over your food, your environment, or your medical care is still incredibly lethal.
The tools upgraded from starvation to chemical agents and exposure, but the fundamental mechanics remain exactly the same. So, what does this all mean for modern public figures? Are we just back in the Roman era of constant danger, just with better technology?
This raises an important question because while the vulnerability of public exposure is high, the survivability has also evolved.
Right, because if we look at this modern landscape where public exposure plus high-powered weapons or covert chemical agents equals almost certain death, it feels pretty bleak. But
Okay.
the math doesn't always add up. But Naldi highlights these wild anomalies in the text.
Yes, the outliers. People who
Mm.
simply defy the odds. Outliers are crucial for sociological study because they show us the absolute limits of the historical patterns.
Let's talk about the wildest outlier first.
Yeah.
Grigory Rasputin in Russia, 1916.
Oh, man.
His death reads like a dark comedy of errors.
It really does. Court insiders plotted to kill him because of his immense symbolic influence over the Tsar's family. It was a classic insider betrayal.
Right.
They poisoned his cakes and wine with cyanide, they shot him at close range, and when he still tried to flee, they shot him again and dumped him in a freezing river.
And the autopsy reportedly showed he might have still been breathing when he hit the water? Like, what?
It's unbelievable. But Rasputin's survival, even temporary, was an anomaly of unpredictable human biology. It was just physiological luck in the face of a chaotic, multi-method attack.
Right, you can't replicate that. You can't train a leader to just metabolize cyanide and absorb bullets.
No, biological luck is definitely not a viable modern security strategy. Which brings us to his much more recent anomaly from the text that shows how survival actually works today.
Right.
Donald Trump in 2024.
Right.
He survived a bullet graze at a highly exposed public rally. Based on the spatial geometry we discussed, the line of sight vulnerability, the sniper-style threat, the open venue, that scenario historically ends in a fatality. Why didn't it?
Well, if we look back at the Roman Emperor Nero in 68 CE, he survived an initial coup purely through personal agility, right? He realized the guards had abandoned him, so he literally fled the palace on horseback. It was individual action.
Yeah.
But the Trump 2024 example shows that modern survival has nothing to do with the leader's personal agility. It is entirely systemic.
Exactly. It requires an invisible infrastructure to be built around the target. Trump survived because of a massive choreographed system. It's not just a guy in sunglasses standing nearby. The moment the threat materialized, the environment was instantly modified.
The Secret Service agents physically covering him bodies becoming literal shields.
And the immediate use of armored transport vehicles basically becoming mobile bunkers,
Yeah.
combined with rapid evacuation protocols and elite trauma care on standby in the motorcade.
The leader doesn't fight back. A machine activates around them to mitigate the exposure and manage the medical risk.
It's the absolute inverse of Abraham Lincoln sitting unguarded in an open theater box.
Yeah. The threat of public exposure is actually faster and deadlier today, but the response is to literally carry a collapsing fortress with you wherever you go.
That's a great way to put it.
I want to translate this historical threat matrix to the person listening to us right now. Because sitting in your car or walking your dog, you might not be dodging state-sponsored nerve agents or worrying about a Praetorian Guard palace coup.
Hopefully not.
Right. But the core lessons of risk management that govern empires apply directly to your everyday life and career.
The principles really do scale down perfectly.
Think about it. Vetting your inner circle. Over 2 millennia, from Julius Caesar to Indira Gandhi in 1984, the most lethal threats came from trusted insiders.
Always.
In your life, the people closest to you, your business partners, your financial advisors, your close confidants, hold the most power to damage your career, your finances, or your reputation if that trust is broken.
Yeah.
Because they already have proximity.
And assessing your environment is just as crucial. Historical figures died because they didn't account for venue vulnerabilities, whether that was the narrow cobblestone street in St. Petersburg or an open plaza in Japan.
Exactly.
In a corporate or community setting, understanding the environment you are walking into, knowing who has access to you, and recognizing when you are exposed is just basic risk mitigation.
And finally, recognizing the danger of symbolic influence. We saw that you don't need a crown, you just need to be a prominent activist or a public face. When you hold influence in your industry, when you become the face of a community or a corporate initiative, you naturally attract opposition.
Visibility invites friction. The more visible you are, the more variables you introduce into your environment that you cannot control.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible timeline. I mean, over 2,000 years, we have seen the weapons change, from hidden Roman daggers to public guillotines to urban bombs, and eventually to sniper rifles and nerve agents.
But the vulnerabilities are constant. Insider betrayal remains lethal. Uncontrolled public exposure is still the highest risk factor. And the danger of holding symbolic influence continues to turn people into targets.
It's a fascinating and honestly somewhat sobering reality check because we live in an era right now where everyone is told to build a personal brand.
Right.
We are encouraged to go viral, to live out loud on the internet, and to maximize our public visibility at all costs. But based on 2 millennia of historical data, it leaves you with a chilling question to mull over long after this audio stops playing.
What's that?
At what point does maximizing your digital and symbolic influence cross the line from being a professional advantage to becoming a literal physical liability?
The paradox of power playing out all over again.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your inner circle tight, watch your sightlines, and we'll see you next time.